Good evening, Guild members. So great to have you all here tonight. I'm Michele Mulroney. I'm one of your WGA board members. And welcome to, let me get this right, Indie Film Night at the Guild, Getting Creative About Getting Your Film Made. A panel on how to get your screenplay financed, produced, and sold in today's feature market. So we're going to walk out of here with films ready to go, which is fantastic. I just want to introduce our fantastic panel. Oh, first I want to say, actually, thank you so much to Kay Wolf and Sheila Boyd and our phenomenal Guild staff for pulling this event together. And a huge thank you to our phenomenal panelists here tonight who are going to share their pearls of wisdom with all of you. They are, to my left, Ben Forkner, who's a producer at Entertainment One, aka E1. To his left, Nat McCormick, who's Executive Vice President of Worldwide Distribution for The Exchange. And then we have Arash Amel. He's a Guild member, a writer and filmmaker, whose credits include Project Extraction, A Private War, The Titan, and Grace of Monaco. Then we have Phil Hay, also a Guild member and a writer and filmmaker, whose credits include Destroyer, The Invitation, Crazy Beautiful, and Ride Along. And then right in the end there we have Adam Rifkin, also a Guild member, writer, filmmaker, whose credits include The Last Movie Star, Look, Mouse Hunt, and Small Soldiers. These are all people working day in, day out in the independent space, in the trenches, and I'm sure they're going to be able to help us all to get a deeper understanding of where the marketplace is at right now, and some hot tips for what we can all be doing. So we're going to start the panel with just a bit of a discussion that I'm going to lead, asking some broad questions to our panelists, then we're going to turn it over to you guys to get into the weeds, ask your specific questions, and benefit from the expertise. So, I was going to say ladies and gentlemen, but gentlemen. Just gentlemen. But hi, ladies. Thanks for being here. I want to start off with just a couple really broad questions, as I said. Starting with, depending on the day of the week and who you're talking to, independent film is either dead or thriving, right? It seems to be very mixed messages out there. So what are your guys' assessments of where the current indie film landscape sits and your thoughts for sort of navigating it in general? I'd love to hear what you think's going on out there. Ben, Nat, you want to kick us off?
Sure, I'll kick us off. The indie film landscape is it's currently a challenging landscape. Obviously, there's the transition from the way it was to the digital. That's like the big swing. So what I do is handle global distribution. We find distributors around the world and we piece together financing bit by bit by bit by bit and make movies happen. And it's not as easy as it once was because those little bits that you get from all the territories, they don't come as easily as they once did. There's a plethora of reasons why. There's local language production on the rise, which means the TV stations globally are looking to maybe fill those slots that they once filled with the American movie with local language production. Of course, there's video games and kids on their phones and all that. But I think the big challenge for us right now is that you have like the Netflixes of the world, and they're kind of saying to us, we're either going to buy your movie and finance the whole thing and make it all, or we're just going to wait and see. And when you have that happen from the global buyers, and there's only Netflix that's really out there right now, and we're waiting for Disney and Warner and Comcast. But then you have the territory buyers that might also say, well, I can't monetize my independent film in the DVD store. I can't make that TV sale because it's local language content. Netflix is now not buying the way they used to, and we're going to wait and see too. And so the more you get the wait and see answers from these distribution channels that were how we piece together financing, the more equity you have to kind of bring in and say, all right, well, everyone wants to wait and see, so let's we need more equity just to make the movie, and then hopefully it sells once it's real. So I think that's one of the big challenges is pre-selling a movie isn't as easy as it once was.
Thank you for a real answer there. Appreciate it.
The one thing I'd add, just to be, I think I think there's a lot of optimism right now about the feature film market, certainly more than there was a couple years ago, mainly because the colonization of Hollywood by the tech industry, by all these streamers that have come in, is actually a very good thing. obviously Netflix, the future of Disney Plus and Warner's and Apple becoming a real feature film player. I think everyone foresees that as being a real value add. And ironically, I think, the fact that movies now don't have to be purely money-making machines on their own, and that they're actually now a mechanism for, building subscribers, selling things on Amazon. It sounds terrible, but it actually, I think, benefits the industry because it allows for films that maybe aren't the obvious, tentpole feature to get made. And so I think there's more, there are more films that wouldn't have gotten made a couple years ago getting made, and I think that's only going to increase. So I think what's challenging at this point is the theatrical model, and I think that's leading to a lot of existential questions about what a feature film actually is.
Yeah.
And a lot of filmmakers too who, their film sells, they get their movie made, does anyone see it? You have no idea. You're totally waiting for Netflix to tell you who, if anyone, saw it. So I think the definition in all of our minds of what a feature film is and how it exists when it's on a streaming platform, and the only thing that distinguishes it from a television show is it's 2 hours instead of 4 hours or 8 hours or 10 hours or 5 years, I think that begins to ask some interesting questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you, guys. Talking to our filmmakers down the row here, there are obviously three really key pieces when you're putting an indie film together. First, you need to have that perfect producer, right? And then you got to go find the money, and then you got to sell your movie. And there's a lot more steps in that, but those are the three big things I always find I'm wrestling with when sort of looking at this space and how to navigate it. What do you guys look for in a producer? And what services should you expect them to provide you as part of that role? I'd love to hear what your experiences have been and how you make that really key decision.
I will start. I think that, and also very specifically in the indie space, the one thing I'll say is you start with a script, which actually has a tremendous, even more value that I don't think there's any independent film that's made off of IP necessarily. I mean, there might be off of IP, off a book or something, but not in the way we look at the studio kind of conglomerate approach. So, and then I would say before that, it's generally in my experience, because we have a very specific relationship with the director we work with, but finding that director, I think that the indie world always has been, and now in my mind especially, is very focused on who's directing the film.
Yes.
And so if you have that, then what we're looking for, I'd say the first thing for everybody is like realizing as writers of independent films, we have to be producers. We have to learn to be producers, and we have to learn how to be not just conversant in that world, but take on those responsibilities. But then in our case, we always bring on a partner.
Yeah.
And to your question, I think what we're looking for is someone who is, it requires so much, I mean, as these guys will tell you, it requires a tremendous amount of hustle and a tremendous amount of repetitive action and pushing the boulder up the hill. It rolls down a little, you catch it, you keep pushing it. And so I think there are a lot of good producers out there who don't fancy themselves filmmakers necessarily, but are like in our case, on our last movie, Destroyer, we worked with a guy named Fred Berger, who we really loved, who his statement from the beginning was, I want to earn my way onto your team. I'm not going to force my way onto your team. I want you to want to hear what I have to say about things that aren't just about making hires and doing everything else about that the producer does. And so I think the most important thing that I would say off the top is when you make that decision, it's very critical, because it's very, very hard to get rid of somebody once you have them. It's, and it's probably more likely to kill the project altogether than it is to like kind of marginalize somebody who you've invited in. So it's just not jumping at a person. You got to be real careful and don't jump right away, and really look for somebody who is going to support the filmmaking team and who can kind of convincingly talk about how they're going to do that and why they're going to do that, and has a track record of dealing with all the financing entities, the foreign sales entities that you're going to need to get together to make your movie.
Yeah, great.
I actually want to just begin with sort of bringing a slightly different perspective. Before, and I think my number one thing, by the way, for producers is they are your partner. You have to see them as your partner. You have to see yourself. I totally agree with Phil. You've got to see them, you got to see yourself as one of the producers, one of the team. But I want to go back to this point because I actually think this is one of the most exciting times that there has been for indie film. I think, so before I made the transition to full-time writing, I've been writing my whole life, always wanted to broke in through indie film. I work for the studios, but 90% of the movies I've had made have been in the indie space. They've been from the 5 to 10 million to, you know, a Jackie Chan, John Cena movie that's 70 million. And what I've experienced would not have been possible 10 to 12 years ago. Absolutely impossible. And before I made the transition, I was a consultant for, funnily enough, Netflix. And one of the things that popped up that was going to be, that sort of gave me hope, and it's kind of borne out today, is every time we ran surveys, we found, and it's true today, people were consuming movies more than ever before. Didn't matter it was in the theaters, it didn't matter, like, at that time it was piracy, now it's Netflix, and then it's going to be with Disney Plus and Hulu, and like, the amount of movies that are being consumed is exploding. At the same time, what's happening is the traditional structures of how movies were made have fallen apart. So what do you have? I mean, you basically have confusion, you have a lot of fear, you have a lot of, you know, old studios kind of going, what do we do? And getting acquired. So where does that leave you as the creator? Well, you're the gateway to the ideas, to the script, right? Yeah. So that's essentially where it begins. And yes, there are always challenges. It is a hustle. But the notion of what an indie film is and was has changed. It's no longer, there was once, it used to be Sex, Lies, and Videotape, anything that Harvey picked up, it was like within sort of those sort of smaller budgets. Now, it's anything. It's anything. It's anything. It's 10 million, 20 million, 50 million. How big is your idea? I mean, I think Roland Emmerich's trying to launch a $150 million, indie movie, sort of selling at a can. But the film markets are evolving, but they are very exciting right now because where there used to be control, there used to be, like I said, studios, even Netflix, even, you know, they're still kind of, you know, I've never seen a place where you have what is an indie idea, an indie project, and you walk in and you go, this is what it is. Here's a script. Here's my producer. Here's Fred. This is what we're doing. And I go, okay, well, like, how quickly can you get into production? I mean, it's insanity, but that's because of the demand. So the demand is there. The question is, how do you position yourself as a writer, as a producer, to take advantage of that? Because it's a Wild West, and it's kind of who dares wins right now.
Yeah. Thank you.
I agree with what everybody said so far. And the good news is, I think, in terms of the state of independent film, can I go back to that for 1 second?
Absolutely.
I just think that there's so many good independent films being made. If you go to any film festival, you see all these great films. Any film festival, anywhere. It's harder to get a lot of them seen in grand ways that we all fantasize about. But that, you know, there's this residual stigma from the old days about a movie that goes straight to video as meaning there's something wrong with it. You remember that? But now the only people who have a stigma about that are we old people, because no young person even gives that a second thought, because they consume media every which way possible. And you know, as a filmmaker, I think to myself, I make this film, I want it to be seen on the biggest screen possible. I want it to get the biggest theatrical release possible, and wouldn't that all be great? But when I think about myself as a film lover, I saw The Godfather for the first time on VHS tape, and I still loved it. So I think any way people are seeing your movies means you win, because you made a movie that somebody's seeing. Even if you made a movie that you can't find, it's also a good time because you can make a movie less expensively now than ever before. Even though big independent movies, I agree, are being made on large scale, you can now make a movie with your phone. I mean, and there are really good examples of that. But you can you can shoot a movie with the phone in your pocket right now. You can edit it on an app. You can market it to a global audience on social media. You can put it on YouTube, and people will see it all over the world. Maybe not a lot, maybe a lot. You don't know. But if you just want to make films because you want people to see the stories you have to tell, it's a very exciting time. And every once in a while, if you do it really, really well, and that movie turns out really, really good, it gets accepted into Sundance. And it changes your life. And somebody picks it up, like A24, and it becomes a big hit. I don't know if you guys, the go-to example I always use is a film that a friend of mine made called Tangerine. Did you guys see Tangerine? Yes. That movie was made for nothing. It was a big Sundance hit, and it was a great movie. But there are movies that are made for way less than that. You know, there's a filmmaker that I know. I don't make documentaries, but I made this one documentary about this independent filmmaker that I know living in a trailer park in Ventura County. And he's made about 100 independent feature-length films. And the budgets of his films are several $100s each. And he stars in all his films all the homeless people that live around the trailer park. And they are the craziest movies you've ever seen. They're truly mental. But you could take, and you know, I'm not going to say whether they're good or bad. It's irrelevant. The point is, I take inspiration from him. That's why I wanted to make a documentary about him, because he's not waiting for permission from anybody to make a movie. He's basically doing the equivalent as a filmmaker of taking a legal pad and a pencil and writing a book. And he's making lots of movies as a result of it. He's got a fan base. He got a documentary made about him. So anyway, so that's that. In terms of a producer, I agree, you have to be very proactive yourself. There's a fantasy, I think, that there's that you're going to meet a producer somehow who you didn't know before, and then you're going to meet him, and he's going to love your script so much that he's just going to magically know how to get it funded for you. And it's hard for that to come true a lot of the time. So you have to be very proactive yourself. But if you are lucky enough to find a good partner, and I agree with you that finding a good producer is like finding a good partner, you want somebody who really loves the material that you've written and really sees the potential and really believes in you and believes in, and when I approach things as an independent filmmaker, I also am approaching it as a film writer and director. But if you have a director attached and you're the writer, that's fine too. You also want a producer who does not know the meaning of the word no, because I have found that you can meet this great producer who's got these great credits and he says all the right things in the meeting, and then he gets 3 no's, and then he says, well, I tried, that was that. This movie is dead. There's no way, obviously there's something wrong with the script that I didn't see before. That's what you don't want. You want somebody who, no matter how many no's they get, it just gets them more and more charged up to want to prove everybody wrong and get the movie made. I'm not saying it's easy to find that guy or girl, but wouldn't it be great if we all found one? I've been lucky. I've worked with some like that, and those are the best kind. And also to your point about excuse me, about being careful who you partner with because it's hard to get rid of them. I'll just tell you one little very quick anecdote about how I had that experience on my last film. I made a film that came out last year called The Last Movie Star. It sadly became Burt Reynolds' final film. But I wrote the movie specifically for Burt Reynolds because I was a lifelong fan. He was my hero as a kid. And I didn't know him, but I wrote the script, and I rolled the dice, and I gave it to his manager, and I said, please give this to Burt, and A, tell him I don't have any money to get it made yet, just to make it sound really appealing. And B, tell him if he's not going to make it, I'm not going to make it. I only wrote it for him. And he said, I'll send it to him, but I don't know what he's going to say. He called me the next day, Burt, and he said he'd do it, which was mind-blowing and a great moment. But I thought, and you'd think after being in the business as long as I've been, I'd be less naive. I thought, oh, Burt Reynolds in this kind of role, at this kind of stage in his life, we're going to find the money like that. It took 10 years to get the money to get the movie made. It kept coming through, falling apart, coming through, falling apart. At a certain point, I was so desperate to get the movie made, I signed an option agreement with a producer who I will not tell you his name, but is a real criminal. And I knew it going in. I signed the paper with my eyes open, and I just thought, how bad could it be? I just have to deal with him to get the movie made. I'm just going to keep my eye on the ball. It's all about Burt. So the option, the first thing he said after the option was signed was, do we have to do it with Burt Reynolds? Burt Reynolds has no foreign value. And that for a year, all I did was battle him about me saying I refused to cast anybody but Burt Reynolds, and him insisting I had to cast anybody but Burt Reynolds. So eventually the option ran out after a year. 3 years later, we get the movie funded, and we make the movie. The movie gets accepted into the Tribeca Film Festival, and then my lawyer gets a call from this criminal saying, he made that movie illegally, I own that script. And I said, he's wrong, right? And the lawyer said, yes, of course he's wrong. I said, well, tell him to go fuck himself, right? And he said, well, not so fast. He said, because he'll sue you and you'll win. But in 3 years, when it's all settled and the injunction is finally lifted, you won't have screened it in the film festival, you won't have sold it to a distributor, and Burt will probably, sadly, have passed on by then, but you'll have won the lawsuit. Or give him the credit he wants, give him the money he wants, and swallow that pill. And that's what I had to do. And it was a tactic of his. He did this all the time, and I didn't realize it. He optioned a ton of material, never intending to get it made, no ability to get it made, but if it ever does get made down the line, he then threatens to sue. He knows they have to pay him off. He makes money. He gets credits, and he's got a big IMDb profile because of it. Anyway, I lost my train of thought, but
That's not that uncommon. I mean,
Yeah.
you run into them, and
Yeah.
they're definitely more. I'm really sorry about that.
it's
like
okay.
the worst.
It's all right.
But it's it's back to the point that actually the biggest lesson I learned on one of the biggest disasters of my life, which was a movie called Grace of Monaco, was a lot to do with the producer and a lot to do with what the producer intended for the movie, which was basically create a house of cards that looked like a movie and played like a movie production and whatever, but it was actually there was a lot that was wrong with the entire process, and I don't want to get sued on camera, but it taught me that who you choose as partners is probably the most important decision you make after what you write down. I mean, it really, in as much as that it can get so litigious. I've seen people who have, the material has crossed their desk that you're adapting, and they suddenly show up as a producer, And so in terms of producer, but also I think ultimately the director as well, in terms of who you partner on that side. And, we're sitting here saying, oh, okay, I appreciate on your first one you may not have the say, or you may not, and you kind of go, okay, in the hands of the gods it is, and let's see, where it ends up. But ultimately, if you can, don't be afraid to get into that decision-making process and choose those partners, because it's not a one-man show or a one-woman show. It's someone said to me, it actually takes a village to make a movie, and you have to trust all those members of that village to be able to realize a vision, not necessarily even your vision, a collective vision that you all share, and underlying all of that, consistently what I look for is integrity. Integrity, integrity, integrity. And that's kind of what I choose. Those are my partners.
So no criminals, guys, okay?
Yeah.
Just
Good
Well,
luck.
that said,
underline
I will
They're not that
say,
easy to spot.
I will say though, that said, some of all of our favorite movies were funded with the help of criminals.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a fine line.
So sometimes, all right, depending on who they are. I just want to quickly go down the line before I turn it over to the room and just ask again a really general question of each of you. What is your one piece of golden advice for those working in the indie film space? If you could say one thing to our group here by the way of advice or a cautionary tale or things to look out for or things you're looking for as producers from your indie film productions, what's the one thing you want to communicate to this room? Not putting you on the spot at all, Ben.
Well, I mean, I think I'm trying to figure out a version of this that isn't cliched, but the truth is, I feel
Don't
like
worry about cliches. It's fine.
I feel like there's a desire more than ever for authenticity of voice, and I think you have to lean into that as a writer. I can tell within the first couple pages if it's someone who came out here in their 20s and has been watching Goodfellas literally as they write the script, and it's just you can just tell. And I in terms of random submissions, what always captivates me is when the first paragraph is, I was a Chicago police officer for 15 years, now I'm a writer. Or I was a public school teacher for 13 years, and now I'm a writer. And I feel like life experience is the most critical thing to lean into. And I also look back at scripts, there are dozens and dozens of scripts that I've developed over the years, and the best ones, you could always tell in the beginning that it wasn't someone looking for a job. It was someone who just had a visceral connection in some way. I was thinking about this one script that I really love, and the writer, when he pitched, it was like it was like an exorcism. It was all just coming out of him. And later I found out he had just gone through a brutal divorce, and like that he tapped into all of that energy to write something great. And so I think it's a cliche to just say write what you feel and write what you know. I think it's a balancing act of figuring out the smart way into what you're writing that somehow is personal, because you have a lot of writers who might just chase the commercial idea and it feels generic, and there's a lot of writers who will do pure personal and it feels irrelevant, to be honest. And so the real advice that I would give my brother, is that read the trades, see what's selling, have some recognition of the marketplace, and when you come up with an idea, find your way into it that will feel authentic in terms of how your voice comes through. Because in this marketplace right now, I just think nothing is more important. And also, there's never been more of an openness to stories that haven't been told before, and perspectives that haven't been seen before. And so I think you have to recognize that as kind of the most essential thing that's going to get recognized and appreciated.
Great. Well said.
I'm not a writer. I might be wrong about this, but I always, with the amount of scripts, I handle about 10 to 15 movies a year. They're all independent movies. We read a ton of stuff. I'm out there on the front lines selling it in every territory in the world, getting all that feedback. And at the end of the day, it's kind of like you just got to know where this project's going to live in the world. Who is the audience for this? And I can't tell you how many times we read a script or something, and we're just like, who's gonna watch this movie? Or like, why'd you write this? We get really critical about it. But the ones that resonate, you're just like, yes, this movie is like this movie. The audience is gonna watch this. Here's how they're gonna watch it, why they're gonna watch it. I can see the vision. So I just try to always approach it from a reverse engineering standpoint when it comes to trying to find the right product. I'm always thinking about, at the end of the day, how is the consumer going to consume it? And then if I can see that vision, then I'm like, okay, let's move this along a little bit further.
Great. Thank you. Spin some gold, Arash. What's your piece of advice?
I would say be realistic, because I also read a lot of scripts. I don't just write but also produce. And one of the things that you always look for is, how do I make this? Right? In the indie space, it's always that. It's kind of, how do I make this? What's the quickest path to production? And this isn't necessarily like a budget thing, but it's a practical question. It's kind of, if tomorrow someone gave you $5 million, $10 million, whatever, how realistically could you commit that to screen? And when you start asking yourself those questions, it's really interesting how they guide you within the ambit, which I totally agree, by the way, guys, in terms of, what does your heart tell you? What does the market tell you? It's this sort of balance. But if you want to get it made, it's sort of, well, how practically can I get it made? If, for every all is lost, which is one man set out at sea, I can show you 1,000 scripts of stories that are set out at sea and underwater and whatever, and it's like, well, how are you going to make that as an indie movie? So it's kind of like, be your own biggest critic in terms of practically how does this get made. But at the same time, obviously, it's that balance of don't let it fetter your imagination and the story that you really want to tell.
I mean, just to kind of build off that, I think the words that kind of came to mind when you asked that question are don't calculate, because I don't think calculating works, like deciding what's going to fill a need or what, trying to approach it from doing the smart thing or doing the thing that tactically you could try to figure out to make sense. In the independent space especially, it is a really interesting synthesis. What I find so fascinating about it is it's a synthesis of the ability to do your purest work, but inherently you are always thinking about practicalities.
Yes.
And it's really exciting to me actually to think about, here's my most, my most heartfelt, my most challenging, the stuff that scares me, this is what I want to do, combined with an absolute need to keep the budget reasonable. Not just because it helps you get it made, because it actually protects the film. The lower the budget is, the more options you have as to what can be a successful iteration of that movie. Because, kind of go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, the thing that's challenged right now most is the traditional theatrical distribution of independent films. It's really, really difficult for the companies putting them out to make money on them. Now, granted, they're like everything else. The theatrical release is really, in many cases, financially an advertisement for the entire long tail of that piece of material that's going to make people money for a very long time. But that's important. So I guess to go back, it's you have to come by whatever you're doing honestly, whatever the desire you have. And if that desire, again, to a practical, I think specifically the genre independent space is really, really thriving and pushing out and out toward what are acceptable iterations of what could be called a horror movie, what could be called a thriller, what could be called a science fiction movie. To me, those are I like to make those movies, but those are the movies that I will go to the theater to see when they're out. And so yeah, I think if you come honestly to genre and you love it, and you can pour yourself into something like that, that seems to me to be a good area to be in. But it is just, don't try to outsmart it. The reason you're doing an independent film is because it's an opportunity to do something very specific and to hold on to it and be that producer of it and not let it go. Go with it forever.
Thank you.
I figured out pretty early on that, because when I was growing up, all I wanted to do was make movies. I'm from Chicago, as you know. The idea of coming to Hollywood and actually getting to make a movie seemed like this untouchable, magical dream that was impossible to conceive of how you really just go about doing it. What I've learned pretty early is that there's no magic to getting a movie made. You just need the money. If you won the lottery today, you could start pre-production tomorrow on your dream movie, period. So my advice to you is win the lottery. No, my advice to you is it's hard to find money to get a movie made because it's expensive. Even a low-budget movie is expensive because it still costs thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars. When I wrote my first script, I didn't think at all about the realities of getting a movie made. I just wrote a movie that I thought would be cool to see. And I learned, and I think to my detriment to a certain degree, and this goes a little bit to what you're saying, I learned when I'm thinking of ideas, I start censoring myself. Who's going to see this movie, right? Who's this movie for? Is this role castable? Is this genre viable? Is this budget affordable? All these things that suddenly start making me say, well, no, I'm not going to write that idea. No, I'm not going to write that idea. And I'm always fighting myself against that, because sometimes I get an idea that I really want to write, that I really want to make, and I really think would be a good movie. And everything in me tells me, don't devote the time to this idea because it's impossible to get made. And sometimes I just defy myself and I write it anyway. and the script never sees the light of day. And sometimes I defy myself and write the idea, and sometimes that movie has gotten made. So it is a balancing act, and there is a lot of things at play, and you have to kind of keep all of it in your mind. I don't think you want to be completely defiant to the realities of how to get a movie made in this marketplace now. I think but I don't think overly calculating is healthy for the creative process. So it's a complicated issue. It's a complicated issue. But as a creative person, which as a creative person, your first job is to write tell the best story you possibly can. And then Nat is going to calculate it. Is this something for us? Can we sell this? Can we put this together? Can we cast this? Blah, blah, blah. And, you might keep an eye on it in the back of your mind before you write it down, but maybe you're going to say, screw it. I'm going to write this movie about this character in this setting, and I know that there hasn't been a movie that has ever been successful in that genre with that casting ever, but that might be the movie that gets made that suddenly changes everything. So I think you kind of got to, you got to be true to yourself, ultimately, is I guess what I'm saying, as a creative person.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to open it up to the floor now. We've got a microphone over there. If you guys want to hop up and ask the panelists any of your questions, or we can just keep talking. Either way.
And someone had said to me once that one of the questions that they ask in meetings that are starting to progress is they ask the question, when's the last time you said, I don't know, which I thought was like a piece of gold. But I'm hungry for other, tactics that any of you employ in any hiring process to help you get a sense, a more confident sense of someone's, makeup that goes beyond just like an ethereal,
Sure.
Tinder date type feeling. You know what I mean?
I meticulously research who I work with. Mm-hmm. It's even though it seems like a big town, it's actually a very small town, and reputations carry. Even like one bad experience, people know about it. Reps definitely know about it. And your fellow writers know about it. I mean, I always canvass any writers who I know. I sometimes reach out to people who work with, you've worked with these financiers, you've worked with these producers. What are they like? Did you have a good experience? Did you have a bad experience? Did they stiff you on anything? So the community is there. And once you see it as a community, you realize that actually reputations can't hide. And they might say to you, and they might, and I've had it with people who've been, fantastic schmoozers and really sort of, win your confidence. And then I ask a couple of people who I trust and who I work with, they're like, seriously, stay away. And once you start to look at the things that people tell you, go, oh, you know what? I know that maybe I'm not going to have a problem today, but I'll have a problem 2 weeks into production when they really start showing themselves. And by that point, it's too late. So I would say don't be afraid to research and ask and reach out.
I also say I really agree, and people really do want to talk about people both to warn you, but really to be positive, to tell you about their positive experience. And I think you can count on people responding to you. And if they respond to you, if you email them about somebody and they respond, yeah, call me, then you probably don't even need to call them.
Right.
Because, but yeah, and I think just to add to that, it's researching the people, but then also you have a right to make your bottom line. Like we're taught as writers to a certain degree of, humility and our, we fitting into an ecosystem or whatever. But when you have an independent
done with
film,
humility.
exactly, it's time. It's really overrated. But the point to me is like you have a right and an obligation to hold that person to absolutely loving the screenplay that you have that you want to make.
Yeah.
That it's okay to say to yourself and your partners, I don't think they love this movie enough, because it will come out and it will come down the line. They may see an opportunity. There may be an actor that they want to work with that is involved in your. There are many reasons, but to me, I need to know that person is in love with the same thing I am. It doesn't mean it's not going to go through a process, but you have the right to demand that of the people that you're the person hiring them. That's your chance to do that. And so, like, you know what I mean? Don't accept anything less than they need to love it, or it's not going to happen. They need to love what it is, not what it maybe could be if you messed around with it a little bit.
Great, thanks.
I had an experience some years ago putting together a film that came together and fell apart several times, and I had an amazing cast. And the wall we kept running into was foreign box office projections. Is that still the case? Does that still hold true, that unless you can get foreign projections to eliminate risk, the finances are going to run?
That question is definitely for me.
Directly.
There's a short list of cast that actually matters internationally. They're iconic, kind of globally recognized, famous cast. And the reason they work internationally is because they're just like no-brainer cast. When you have Nicole Kidman in a project, it's a no-brainer. When you have Ryan Gosling in a project, it's a no-brainer. So there's actually a fairly small pool of really actual valuable cast that you can just kind of like move a project forward based on the cast. But one thing I've definitely seen change over the years is director is become more important, because execution of the film has become more important, because quality has become more important, because the bar's been raised. Movies are not the only thing out there now that can entertain people, especially American movies. American movies used to dominate everything. Like there was nothing else to watch. So now the bar has been raised so high that the quality of the film at the end of the day is hugely important. So, and it's funny because you'll meet producers like, I got this amazing cast, Burt Reynolds. And you're just like, oh boy.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, because it's a small list, you know, to really kind of go out there and do the pre-sales based on cast. So if you don't have the ability to get Charlize Theron attached to your movie, which is hard to do because A-list talent spread so thin now, it's really kind of just, is the script really great, and is the filmmaker trusted to make it? We've sold movies that it wasn't even about the cast at all. It was just like, oh, this guy's doing the movie, we're buying it, period. So if you can't get the cast, if you can get a great filmmaker, that can be just as good.
Can I add a real specific detail that might be helpful too? Sometimes you do have a choice of how to put it together. Like when we were making The Invitation, which is a horror thriller film that we made for $1 million with equity financing. And we had an opportunity to make the movie for $3 million, but it came with a certain cast contingency. It came with a certain, here's a list of cast you have to get to the lead. And they were casts that we thought we could probably get, but we were like, the $1 million version we knew we could make. We knew it would be, to our mind, we could make it just as good, and we didn't have to sit around waiting and hoping for one of those actors to actually show up. We could just get the movie going. And so trading resources for the freedom to actually press go on a movie, that is very meaningful, and that can happen sometimes, because sometimes what you're doing in the world is they're adding up your estimates for what you're going to get foreign, and that's going to help determine the budget. So it's just a plea too to say, like, again, the lower the budget gets, they're always going to want somebody. They always would love. Everyone would love to have Ryan Gosling in every single movie. Or like, yeah, if you could just get Channing Tatum, that'd be awesome. But there is a level where you can, with the right financiers, where you can make a deal with them that says, no, this movie is greenlit based on the script and the director, and then we'll cast the movie.
Right.
I mean, if I can just add, The Invitation was actually a really great example. I thought, excellent movie, by the way. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I think it deserves it. Come on. It goes back to the practicalities question. I mean, that was a single location.
Yeah.
It was, claustrophobic. Very much dependent on the execution and Karen's direction, and that allows you scope to go up or down. Like if you suddenly got Nicole Kidman and a whole bunch of other people sort of showing up, then conceivably they go, oh, okay, here's
Right.
15 minutes,
Right.
make this. And sometimes you get that decision where it's like, well, actually, you know what? Like, we want to make it for a minute because we don't want the pressures, and because you start, the bigger the budget gets, the more you actually compromise.
Right.
I mean, that's where you start to sort of cry over the pages of the script that aren't what they used to be. So yeah, I mean, that gives you that flexibility.
Thank you.
Ben, while someone's just getting up to the mic, can I ask you,
Yeah.
when you're looking at stuff at E1, I mean, of course, the right actors being attached is juicy and great, but how important is that to you? I mean, do you really feel like you need all those attachments in place? Are you guys willing and able to sort of get excited and evaluate a script on its own merits, or does it, in this marketplace, being realistic, does it help to have these, I'm not going to call them a package, I'm going to call them attachments. Does it help to have these attachments?
Yeah, no, I mean, it absolutely helps have the attachments. The one thing I was going to add is the thing about Hollywood that I think is unique to the industry is that it attracts financiers, some financiers who are willing to make reckless, stupid decisions, which is to the great benefit of movies, to be honest. And it almost would be interesting to look at Oscar-nominated films and the companies that finance those movies, and that many of them have flamed out. And you can, Worldview with Birdman, Indian Paintbrush. I mean, you could literally, or just Annapurna as financed by a billionaire who doesn't need to pour over the foreign sales. Like there are countless, and because there's kind of a price of admission for getting projects and getting paid attention to when you come to town as a financier, there's always a number of financiers that are willing to take risks that probably aren't the right risks to take or aren't logical risks. So I think the caveat of all of this, and we're working with a few of them, is that if something's great, even if the math doesn't line up, there are financiers, well-financed financiers, that will often take a risk and take that jump. I mean, you don't want to play for that as your model, but it is a benefit of the business.
Here's my question for the writers. So you finish your script. What's your next step? So on your like a nuts and bolts, like on your last film, you finished it, and what did you do?
Drink a glass of wine, go down to the pharmacy. Someone else should answer. You said.
I'll say, every project has been different in that regard. So just to take example, my last film that I wrote for Burt Reynolds, I reached out to Burt Reynolds' manager, and I asked him to please send the script to Burt Reynolds. And frankly, because Burt Reynolds was not doing anything for a while, I was able to get him to agree to send it to Burt Reynolds. Would Brad Pitt's manager send Brad Pitt my script? No, absolutely not. And I think you bring up a very good point, because I think a lot of people have a script written. They don't know a bunch of producers that they can audition to find the one that they feel is the perfect choice to partner with. They don't know a bunch of different foreign sales companies or crazy rich people willing to take risks. So what do you do? And also, too, taking into consideration that a lot of people won't read unsolicited scripts, because if your script is not being submitted through an agency or management company or a lawyer that people have heard of, they're oftentimes hesitant to even open the envelope for fear of something that they may have that may be in a similar wheelhouse, getting sued because somewhere down the line, if they don't want that script, but they do the script they've been developing for 5 years that happens to be of a similar genre, they get sued because the writers will say that they ripped them off. Therein lies the big challenge. And if you don't have a rich uncle, and if you don't have a really good movie star next door neighbor who's willing to help you out, therein lies the big challenge that I think everybody is trying to figure out. How do you get your script seen by someone, funded by someone, and made? That's why, for me personally, I can't speak for anybody else, I would recommend writing something that you can just go make. Write something that you can make for whatever budget you can afford right now, or you can cobble together with money from your friends, or you cash in, your bond, or whatever, just to get your first movie made. Another example, I think, which is probably a better example, is Paranormal Activity, which was made for about $5,000. Oren Pele funded the movie himself, shot it in his home. He was the crew. He was the entire crew of the movie. And because the movie was good, and because the movie was scary, It got accepted into the Slam Dance Film Festival. It got screened at the Slam Dance Film Festival, and everybody who saw it got scared. It got bought by, I think it was DreamWorks at the time, and then became Paramount. It became a Paramount project. But it was bought by DreamWorks, and it sat on a shelf for over a year because the studio said, we can't release a movie that costs $5,000. We're a big studio. We'll remake the movie, and we'll use, Oren told me this. They were going to use the original movie of Paranormal Activity as a supplemental piece of material as a DVD extra when they remade the movie with Sandra Bullock. And he was just excited that he was going to get to write the remake.
Wow.
But as the story goes, it just sat on a shelf for a long time, and then Steven Spielberg watched it and saw its merits, and then it got released. But so I would just, and by the way, sure, it's easy to poo-poo the idea of, oh, just go make your movie, because so many people make their movie and nothing happens with them. Well, that's true, but most of them stink, you know? And he was trying to make the next Blair Witch Project. And how many people were trying to make the next Blair Witch Project after the Blair Witch Project came out? A lot. But his was good. It was better than most. And it changed the whole industry and became one of the biggest, most successful franchises. So my recommendation is, while you're shopping your bigger movie, while you're looking for producers who are good partners, while you're looking for movie stars, while you're looking for financial partners to make movies in the low millions, mid millions of dollars, don't wait to make a movie. Just make a really tiny movie and make it really, really good. Take it really seriously. That's my advice.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yes.
Just real quick, having worked in Management 360 for 15 years, which represented tons of writers, so it doesn't feel too daunting. Just know that there is an entire ecosystem of people who just want to find and read something great. Their entire livelihood is rooted in it. Their entire ability to escape from the hell of being an assistant is to read that script, to pour through the screenwriting competitions in obscure places in the world. Like, they are doing everything they possibly can to find what you've written. So it's actually, I mean, it's like go to Toast on Third and throw a rock and you'll hit endless number of people who are desperate to find a new voice, an interesting idea. We had an assistant that found a trailer that two kids in Fresno had made just of a movie they wanted to make. That led to giving it to Jason Blum. The movie was bought. They made the movie for nothing. The movie was bought by Warner Brothers. It did incredibly well. I mean, and that was just making a fake trailer, but it had something distinct to it and caught someone's eye. So just know that everyone out there is looking for something to go to their boss and say, "This is awesome. I just read this. Promote me."
Can I just really
Phil,
quickly add one thing that's practical advice that may that will again become relevant when Michele figures the agency thing out, which I know she's about to.
So close.
Is that again, once this gets figured out, the agency independent film departments are tremendously useful, and they are partially because, and it doesn't have to be your own agency. What they're useful, one of the ways they're useful is that they represent financiers, they represent foreign sales companies, they represent writers, and they do have a vested interest in that case. It's kind of the good version of the bad version that we're all talking about in TV, of putting feeding scripts to their financing partners that they think are great and they think will work. And so the salient point there is it doesn't have to be an agency you're represented by, because sometimes it'll be a better fit somewhere else.
Have you done that with a script? Have you turned it over to the...
Yeah, both The Invitation and Destroyer were the kind of process was my advice is marry a director. Then you have a director.
A good one.
A good director. But both of those, she is represented at ICM. I was represented by UTA. But in that case, ICM was the people we had a kind of a previous relationship, so they packaged both of those movies in. Again, they put us together with foreign sales agents that helped us put us together with financing. So both of those movies were made kind of with ICM from the beginning, kind of being the operators, kind of putting people together.
Do you have something to add, Arash?
I think so.
Yeah, go.
I can only talk about sort of just my own experience, because I had actually the opposite, experience in terms of I was never the guy that could or would or had the inclination to go out and make something. So it was kind of, how do I break in? And it came. I know we don't have agents anymore, and it wasn't actually the agents, ironically, that initially helped me. It was a manager. It was actually two managers. The first, unfortunately, passed away at a very young age, but he was somebody who worked with me for, I want to say, from like 2002 until I sold my first spec in 2010. And he believed in me. He was there all the time, pushing, hustling, giving notes, making sure it was right for the market, doing all of that stuff that I couldn't get my head around. That was priceless. I mean, that in terms of somebody who is believes in you, can access, I think is to also to your point, Ben, that, they are, I mean, I keep going back to partners, but they are, again, as much partners in your success and, on multiple projects, on a career. And then, and subsequently, he, through one spec that was good, it wasn't great, I'll say, it wasn't, it got made into a movie because he managed to somehow hustle his way into CAA, which kind of opened up and it was the early days of their film finance department, and he worked that system, and that's what it comes down to. And then subsequently, the career I've built has been built on, again, another management company that actually doesn't produce, kind of is like, we're all about you and the material, and saying, okay, where do we want you to be? Where do we want your business to be? And this is the thing that I wanted to say earlier, that I always encourage writers, just again from my own experience, don't see yourself as just a writer. See yourself as a business. Because when you see yourself as a creator, as somebody who is the starting point of not just one movie, but 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, it doesn't matter, $50,000 movie, $5 million movie. You are the culmination of hopefully decades of filmmaking. And having that manager, having that somebody who's there with you and nurtures you and sees you through all the good times and the bad times and the times when you want to sort of rip your hair out and cry, and there to hopefully celebrate all your successes, it's probably more important than anything else, for me.
Can I just add, though, as the representative of the group whose agents and managers have not been helpful to me, you'll often, I mean, the good news is everybody can have an IMDb Pro account, and everybody can go to every production company on IMDb and see the email addresses of all of the different producers and production companies and assistants and who all work there, and you can submit your stuff yourself. You just have to be persistent, but you don't want to be a stalker. You don't want to be creepy about it. You want to be professional about it. The good news now, though, and how you can utilize the current turmoil with the WGA and the agencies is just say, I just had to fire CAA, so I'm sending this to you myself. But I would say it's very important when you're pursuing this stuff and when you're the only one doing it for yourself. You're going to experience a lot of rejection and a lot of people just never responding back to you. And it's going to piss you off or it's going to make you feel bad. But you just have to not let that blip on your radar at all. You can't you can't take any of that seriously or personally. It's Hollywood, right? I mean, you just have to be prepared for that. So you just have to be a machine. You're just a GPS device that's been programmed to success, which is down there. So every obstacle that comes in your way, you just have to recalculate the route to another direction. You know what I mean? So just keep trying every which way to get to the right people, to get to the right, to get to find the money, to find the actors, whatever. And by the way, the quickest way to get a movie made really is, if you don't have the money to spend yourself, is to get somebody attached who's of value, you know, like they were saying. But that's not so easy. So you just have to. I have found that one route is for better or for worse, the do-it-yourself route. So you have to make that your full-time job as well as writing is your full-time job. So you have to go make your list of all the production companies. I'll just say this very briefly. The first movie that I ever wrote, that I tried to get funded, I had no idea how it worked. I was 19 years old. I wrote this script. This was the one that I wrote that I didn't think at all about how hard would it be to get a movie made. I just wrote a movie that I thought I'd like to see. And this was 1986, and so it was a different business then. And so I just went through the yellow pages looking for whoever had the biggest ads. I thought they had the most money. And like dentists and auto repair places, and I just thought if they can take out a full-page ad in the yellow pages, they obviously have a lot of money, and they'll probably want to put it into my movie. And I submitted my script to a lot of these places, and they didn't know what I was talking about. We're dentists. We don't. You know. But one guy, for whatever reason, took pity on me. This lawyer. I submitted it to this lawyer, and I thought he was Hollywood because he was the lawyer. I don't remember his name now, sadly. He was the lawyer who did the deal for Easy Rider. And I thought, wow, Easy Rider was a big hit movie. He's going to fund my movie. So he took a meeting with me. I don't know why. And he sat me down. He said, you're doing this all wrong. He said, you can't just go to dentists and eye doctors and ask them to fund your movie. He said, there are professional companies that do this as their job. You have to research out who these companies are, and you have to submit the script to these companies. And at that time, there was this book called Hollywood 411. You had to find it. Now you just go on IMDb Pro. So, but that's what you have to do. I should say that's one way to do it. But if you have no agent, no manager, no friends, no family, which, I mean, we're writers, so basically that's the case, right? So I would recommend just starting that way. Make your list and start submitting your script, and don't become angry when they treat you like shit, because again, we're writers, right? So.
To the defense of the dentist, Sam Raimi funded Evil Dead with a collection of dentists.
That is true. That is true.
Amazing. Thank you. Next question.
Yes, I have two questions. One is with this, with the climate we're in now, there's become more like there's Blacklist, there's Inktip, there's becoming more companies that say, hey, look, we'll get producers to pay us to get material, and we'll funnel this, we'll make it accessible to producers. And I'm sure you all know the, Blacklist, Inktip, all those companies. One is how legit are those companies, or how practical are the companies? And two, more and more, especially A actors, are becoming executive producers. So especially when you see like Jessica Chastain, executive producer, smaller budget movie, I'm saying, oh, well, she's the executive producer because she's getting half of the gross profit. So that's the other question as far as getting talent. They become executive producers. Maybe it's a vanity piece they want to do, or maybe they just want to spread out. And that's the second question.
I mean, I can address the talent. What's the name of this panel? Like the magic tricks and getting creative about putting it together, right?
Getting creative, exactly.
I mean, we're in post right now in a movie that we did. It's a comedy we did with Drew Barrymore, and we co-produced it with her. She's not an executive producer; she's a producer. I did Rabbit Hole with Nicole Kidman years ago. She produced it, so that is a definite. You see a lot more of that. We're doing a movie upcoming with Zoe Saldana that she's in. She's producing it. Her husband's directing it. So that is definitely a creative way to kind of access talent. I mean, again, this isn't a perfect world where you can get to these people, but I see a lot of that, and that's how we can get creative. So I don't have to pay you $3 million to do a movie because you own a piece of it and you're invested. So, I mean, I see a lot of that. That's one thing that we are 100% focused on as far as creatively getting movies made. let's stop paying the stars to do an independent movie a ton of money. Let's get them really caring about making the movie and get invested in it.
How many of those were put together by the agency or the agents before it came to you?
I mean, the Drew Barrymore one we're doing with CAA and UTA.
Right.
When we work with the main agencies on most of the bigger-ish movies that have A-list cast, because they pretty much have a clause which is just like, we're handling domestic and putting the movie together if you were using one of our talent, and then we do most of the work anyways. But yeah.
That's a whole other subject.
But by the way, all these actors that have production companies, and a lot of them are very actively involved in their production companies, those are all, you can find all their contact info on IMDb Pro.
That's right. To the other question about, these services like the Blacklist these days and the current climate that we're in, do you guys access? Do you trust that stuff? Do you go look in there for stuff? I mean, or do you wait for it to come to you? Are you using these services?
I mean, I respond to unsolicited submissions. So I mean, any way it comes about.
You're going to regret saying that, Ben.
No, honestly, just 2 weeks ago, unsolicited submission came in. I read it. I liked it. He was signed 2 days. That week it became a feeding frenzy. He got an agent. He got a manager. Anyway, he's a UK writer.
Amazing.
But so yeah, Blacklist is totally legit. I mean, I think I would. I don't know what it costs to make submissions, but I would, if I were a writer and I had written something and I didn't know what to do, I would submit to as many festivals, screenwriting competitions. When I'm looking at unsolicited submission, if someone says, "Hey, this finished 4th in this screenwriting competition," well, that's means it's better than a lot. So why not? So I think Blacklist is definitely legit, and I would just submit to whatever I could.
Blacklist is even producing technically. Yeah. Now, I just met with them. They did their first movie. It's called Come As You Are. But they're even now starting to produce, oddly enough. Yeah.
Next question.
So my last experience was as a producer, and it was very much through the foreign sales-driven model. So, we came in with dreams. My partner was a foreign sales agent. We watched them diminish to, nightmares, and it was a really hard process to get the movie made. Saying all that, and then respect to your idea that the pie has shifted, where we don't get as much money out of certain territories. How have you guys adjusted to that? And then, as a writer who has produced, how do you view people bringing in things like, "Hey, I've got a potential equity source"? And then, my follow-up question to that would be, what's your argument to somebody who has a ton of money, who always says, "I have no idea how movies work, and I never know anybody who ever makes any money on them"? How do you combat that sales pitch when they're clearly interested in they have, if people have the money, what have you guys found? Obviously, you work with a lot of independent, like we were just talking about, independently wealthy people who finance films. What's your counter, or your counter to, "I don't understand how we make money. No one ever does. They always just lose money"?
I agree. It's hard to make money on independent movies, especially if you're the equity slug. You own the movie, but you're the last out. It's a tough position to be in. But there's ways to mitigate as much risk as possible. When I'm talking to an equity financier, it's like, okay, you're here, you're about to finance a movie, you're very rich, right? Because you can afford to lose all this money, right?
You're the last to get paid.
It's just where on the risk profile spectrum are you comfortable being? If you're like, I can be 10 on the risk profile, then let's go for it. But if you're like, you need to be down here, it's like, well, we need to drop the budget, we need to do this and shift things. It's just, there's a lot of independent movies made, right? And then there's the viable independent movies, which are put together usually with a slightly larger budget, which have, a more marquee director or cast involved. And there really is ways to put together a movie that's viable, and you decrease the equity slug as much as possible. But that usually takes a larger scope budget, especially right now. My international buyers, just to speak to that, they're looking for stuff that they can go out theatrically, because their other sources have been cut off. DVD's gone, so that's been cut off. They can't do the TV sales the way they used to. That's cut off. The pay TV, SVOD thing is all shifting. So how do they make their money? Where can they definitely make money? Theatrical movies. So for that, you need a certain level of product. But
So are you saying you
get
really
to that
make
level,
like a $15 million movie or a $3 million movie in your model, I should say?
I like movies that have a budget of higher than like 5 and above, because you can make a $10 million movie theatrical without having a wide domestic release in the U.S. The second you start making a $15 to $20 million movie, the only way I can pull the financing out of international at the level you need is if I can guarantee them a wide domestic release. So a $10 million movie, I think is very interesting right now because I can make that. They can go out theatrically with it, or it could be a streamer buy. But I mean, I just had my weekly call with Netflix, and if they're going to buy an original movie and make it, they want a $15 million budget. You know, they don't have any interest in making a $4 million movie. That's a wait and see. We'll pick it up from a festival if it does gangbuster business.
And then when you say the theatrical side, does it need to have stunts? Like a lot of times people say I want a $10 million movie that used to be like a $30 million movie. They just make it for everyone.
I mean,
gets paid
as long as
30.
it looks 10 million and it feels 10 million.
Cool.
And it can be any genre, but if you're gonna do drama, you definitely need something that's like gonna win awards or acclaim or attract Nicole Kidman in that type of role.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And you can also, just to add, you can, again, if it's a movie that feels like it can play around the world because of either the star or because of, even if it's not one, even if it's a very strange version of that, our movie that we just did, Destroyer, was a $9 million movie with Nicole Kidman, and it's a lot of things, but it's a cop movie, and around the world, that's something that I understand. So the movie sold to every single territory around the world, so there's that backstop of all of that. They played theatrically everywhere, and that's another thing where once genre comes into play, and if you can have a director who can deliver a movie that looks bigger than it is, then that is actually something that, from your position, you're saying you can see the road to success with.
And I can sell a movie as like it's a $15 million budget. You can make it for $9 million. As long as it looks 15 for most distributors, they don't care. As long as they're getting what feels like a theatrical movie that looks like a $15 million movie.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Malcolm Mays. Hi, everyone. We're writers. It's tough out here. I'm at the 4th year mark of a potential project, which is probably nothing to some of you, especially you, Adam. And I'm starting to see daylight, right? Like I went through the submission to Netflix, them telling you, okay, it's a great story. Come back when you have some type of film already in product. It's under 15. It's a socio-political thriller. I'm black. The lead's black. And everybody in Black Panther is booked up for the next 10 years. So... first-time director, all these things, these elements that just make most people go, what the fuck? On the bright end of it, I represented by a major agency, got some pretty good elements aligned as far as talent, even found a popular production company with a star at its helm to take on the project. Now I'm in this space where I'm thinking, I've produced an independent feature film at 17 years old, went to Telluride with it, started it, directed it, did the very thing you said, to get the agent, to get to the next level, to write the job that gave me the money to write the next one, right? And now I'm here. And I have to give the reins over to these producers who are great guys, wonderful people, but the first thing they did when I went through 4 years of trying to find talent that would make sense was go, okay, we're gonna send it over to the packaging over at our agency. And so now I'm going, okay, so what does that mean? And you guys, some of you answered earlier that to trust that mechanism, to trust that machine, the very machine that we've kind of collectively been having an issue with, right? Especially when you're a do-it-yourself DIY filmmaker, to suddenly have to pass the reins over and just hope that somebody can sell a movie that's going to be funded domestically, because internationally there's only a few people of color that sell anything. And they're all, once again, booked up. And now you have this package of somebody who might make sense domestically. What is the true, genuine answer of likelihood? What does it look like? Who are those? Is it Braun? Who are these people? What is this big sheet that we're waiting for somebody to step from behind? And is there an algorithm? What's happening? Because I just feel lost. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not afraid to say I'm lost. You feel me? What happens? What does that mechanics look like? Who are those people?
Epitaph. What's happening?
Yeah, like
that is literally every day. What is happening?
Right.
And again, I was actually alluding to that when I said, as you grow, and congrats, because it seems like you're progressing and doing extraordinarily well. And as your career grows, and if you are smart enough and also brave enough to know when to hold on and when to let it go, right? To see. And again, I'm speaking purely from my own experience, kind of see your career and this project in context, right? That if you can say, you know what, I'm working with good people. I chose the right people. They chose me, however it was that we came together. I trust these people. They may let you down. They may not. right? I mean, it's the process. There might be somebody who attaches and they go off and you make the movie and the star wants changes. And hey, look, Nightmare Scenario, you might even get replaced as the writer and they'll bring someone else in. I mean, it is, once you kind of take the money and gift it over, unless you're at a place where you can actually sort of,
Leverage,
bring some clout to it
Yeah.
and just make your voice heard. And it takes a couple of movies to do that. And ironically, it doesn't even need hit movies. You just need to know what you're doing and be able to have, and I found sort of just the courage to put that humility aside for a moment and say, hey, there was a moment on I think my third film where I turned around and went, I know more than everyone here. It's the director's making his first movie. The producers have, I thought, the last 3 movies were good, but I can see them kind of scrambling.
Right.
And that's a real awakening. And but to kind of trust that if that's what you want, it requires actually, sacrificing a couple of things in terms of going, okay, I've done everything I can. I'm just there was a producer I work with said something to me years ago that always stuck. He said, look, filmmaking is this process of you get all the pieces and you pack a raft, right? You get the script, you get the director, you get the producers, and then you have to push it over the rapids, and that's. It can start at any point. Typically, it starts at pre-production. And you don't know you just have to go to the bottom of the rapids and just pick up all the pieces and hope that you can assemble them again into a movie.
So your answer is optimistic. Got it.
Right? But this is the thing. It's trust in yourself. You are the creator. You are the writer. You've already done one and another one, and you're going to do more, right? So the question is, I've always tried to be precious where it matters, and if it's something that I don't like what you're doing and whatever, I'll ruin it myself rather than have someone else ruin it. But I think at the same time, there's also the longer game. There's it's what is it you expect your career to be? What is it that you want? Do you want this movie to be perfect, and is this the hill that you're prepared to die on? That's fine. You can interject yourself into the process. The other side of it, the other extreme is you go, okay, this is going to be an opportunity for me to learn. There's going to be, even if I don't think anyone here knows what they're doing, I can see what they're doing wrong. And actually, the most I learned the day that I became sort of, a producer, was on possibly the worst experience I ever had, because I saw where everything went wrong. I went, that's how not to make a movie. So we're going to do exactly the opposite. So it's kind of, I just kind of, went around the houses to basically say, you have to make a calculation. You've fed the machine. You've put it all together. It's got to go its own way. If you don't like where it's going, you either have to kill it, or you have to just let it go, and it's kind of no longer yours, and that's pretty difficult. And kind of detach and say, I'm a fountain of other material, and there's going to be, more and more. And as I progress, I will have more say, I will have more control, and start asserting that.
There's so many times when in this whole process where you realize what the frontiers of your individual power are, and sometimes and there's always forces that whether it from who you choose to ally with and not really looking at as handing it over, really saying I'm in this, I'm gonna try to use those kind of entities as tools, as opposed to let them run things necessarily, to the point of where in the end, if you have great relationships with the people you're working with, you have some say over where the movie's going to get sold, if it does get sold, but you don't have the final say. And who distributes the movie can mean everything. But I guess just to kind of go back to what you're saying, it's figure out where your lines are, what you need. And to me, making an independent movie, the whole point is that there's no reason for it to exist if it's not going to be close enough to something that you want it to be. There's not a financial incentive necessarily to do it. There's not any of those other things. But, you know, like, I would encourage you to look at it. I mean, having met you for 30 seconds, I fully believe that you will be able to convince these people that you are utterly essential to this thing that you're doing. And that's it. It's like just demanding that space for yourself of saying, I am essential, and then making those calculations as it goes. If that raft starts falling apart, taking care of your part in that process too.
Additionally, I would say also it is a collaborative process, obviously. And so sometimes it's the collective direction that it's going in isn't maybe exactly the way you would have chosen, but maybe that's okay anyway. And you don't, I mean, you don't want to be that writer that gets banned from the set because you're difficult, you know? There's a lot of stories of guys like that, you know? You want to be a part of the team. Obviously, if they're complete pricks and are kicking you off the team before the team is even fully assembled, they're the wrong team. But it sounds like maybe they're the right team.
No,
and
they're
you
good
should,
people, yeah.
Yeah, then you should trust the process, you know?
Yeah.
Do you have
Yeah, I
something
would
to
love
add,
that
Ben?
in to just close up my question, because
Yeah.
I got my heart filled here. Now I need my brain to make sense, which is like that pool. Like, how big virtually is that pool? Because it's really just, I'm going off of words of other people, which is fine, which is that trust factor you guys speak of. But literally on the ground, what does that pool look like for domestic money for specialty projects that don't have all the best, like the most shiny elements attached?
I mean, on the lower budget side, most of them are financed with equity. I mean, because it's not a practical function to try to go pre-sell a movie that has a tiny budget with no cast. That's just not really going to happen. So it's about finding that magic financier, and it's just going to come down to the script being really good, because that's what's going to get a director attached, and that's what everyone's going to get excited. I can't imagine what it's like to be a writer to spend God knows how much time writing a script, and it's just not that great. But that's half the battle right there. So
We know what that feels like.
yeah. I mean,
I give you one very
write your next
specific-
script and then write your next one. It's a volume business.
Talking about people to work with, I'll give you a very specific suggestion of people who are very taste-based and who were absolutely wonderful is 30 West, the people who financed Destroyer. I have nothing but really great things to say about them, and so those people are out there, and like I would specifically go after them, because I feel Micah and the people over there, I experienced with them, they're based on the material. Then the bottom line for them is just what you're saying. So that was
great.
Yeah, +1 to 30 West. I will just say that the Guild is putting together a screen resource list. It's going to be coming soon with just really key contacts in the indie space for all of you guys, so that you can be proactive, reach out, kind of go beat the pavement and, make those inroads. So we're putting together a very, very carefully curated list for all of you, and we're hoping that we're going to also continue to do more indie film events over the next coming months. So keep yourselves tuned for that. As soon as it's ready, we are working on it very carefully, making sure that the people that we have on the list are really ready to be reached out to by you guys and willing and able to field your questions and inquiries and all that stuff. So staff is working very hard on it. We will let you know as soon as it's ready. It's coming soon.
Nat just said something right at the end,
Yes.
which I thought was
Go for it.
inspired and excellent. And it's a volume business, right? It's never been a volume business. Like, no one's ever opened a fire hose on people and said, here you go, movies, just like drown yourself in movies where you're spending an hour trying to find something to watch and then you fall asleep. And and that has so changed the game, because it's changed how we write up to a point. Some of the most successful spec writers that I know right now, and they're not like 20-year veterans. They're like young kids who are coming through. They're cranking out specs like nobody's business. They're always like selling like every day. It's like, oh, they sold another spec and they sold this to Netflix, and they're going into production very quickly, because you just have to fill this pipeline. So it goes back to the thing of be precious, but only precious enough that you have you absolutely spend 20 years on something, but also remember that it's stuff is turning constantly faster than ever before.
Hey, Rush.
Hello,
This
Michael.
question's for, how you doing? This question's for Nat. With all the streaming that's now happening, internationally, this has to do with like foreign value of actors that aren't necessarily movie stars. So with a lot of like Richard Madden and The Bodyguard, or Rachel Brosnahan and Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, or Jodie Comer and Killing Eve, like are those kinds of? I mean, I know if it's like a truly domestic American comedy television show, that's not necessarily, may or may not be going international, but those kinds of shows like Games of Thrones that are just like truly international shows, but those actors don't necessarily have the box office track record of opening movies, how is that playing into your like algorithm or whatever it's called?
Sure, and that's a really good question, because that's like something I always use when I'm trying to sell movies. I'm just like, but it's from this, and you try to use that. And sometimes there are some like cracks where that does work, and sometimes not. I remember one conversation with Netflix. I'm like, we got Lana Condor in a movie, and she's in All the Boys in the World, and they're like, Nat, every actor in the world is on Netflix. So like, no actor gets special treatment because they have a show or a movie on Netflix, because they're all on Netflix. But there are some funky ones that will pop out, like if it's the right budget movie, like a Kiefer Sutherland because of 24 could work, or like maybe Mark Harmon in the right movie because NCIS is the biggest show in the world. You get the big band guys in a comedy. That can resonate definitely to a certain degree. And how it all plays out with the platforms, I don't know. We'll see. The cool thing is that like what is an independent movie too is kind of a good question. It's like, is an independent is a movie that simply gets bought at the very beginning, fully financed by a distributor for the whole world. Like, is that really an independent movie? I kind of don't think that's really even an independent movie, because you don't have to scrap and scrape to put it all together. It's just like, Netflix, do you want to make this movie? Yes, here's a check, done. Like, is that an independent movie? Like, that's a good question. And now we have additional studios. So I think I'm just kind of getting off track here, but there's now more opportunity because you don't just have the big 6 studios. Apple is a studio. Amazon is a studio. Netflix is a studio. They can fully finance your movie and globally distribute it. So, and then it's just going to grow. Hulu's going to become the adult arm of Disney Plus for adult-themed content. They're about to go global. Buena Vista International, who we sell a lot of content to, that's Disney International. They have 224 titles in their international library. They're going to take the Fox library they acquired, and they're going to be able to go global with Hulu. And that's going to be the adult offering to Disney Plus. So once that fully goes out, I'm doing my first deals with Warner Media, which is still just like, they're just tiptoeing in and figuring it all out. Believe me, these companies barely know what they're doing. I'm actually selling a movie right now for Hulu. One of the first movies they bought the world on, Big Time Adolescence. Great little comedy, but they don't even have an international operation, but they bought the world just because. So we're selling international for them, for Hulu. I did the same thing for Amazon when they first started on a documentary called Gleason. They bought the world, and they have no international operations, so we were selling international for Amazon. So I think there is a lot of exciting opportunity in the film space because we have all these new studios, and they simply cannot create enough content to fill the demand. They just can't. Most of the offerings that are on these platforms are third-party content. So in this arms race of original productions, there is going to be, I think, a lot of opportunity, but it's about getting to a certain level where it's like, it's in that zone that they're looking for. So.
But do you feel like some of the talent that I was mentioning in the past, it didn't have 5-10 years ago, if you were starring in these shows and you didn't have an open box office, you couldn't get foreign sales to pay attention. Do you think that's changing, or ish sort of?
Like I said, yeah, there is some more clout for TV actors now that have successful shows. Who was I just talking to? They're like, do you have anybody that's in the show Riverdale? I mean, seriously. And then there's some other just weird ones. So you're going to see more of that on these hugely successful kind of TV shows. But at the same time, it's just like everything's more fragmented. Movie stars aren't as powerful as they once were, and like, I think creators have more power than they've ever had.
I think if you look at local markets, actually, that's where my experience has been. I mean, I do a lot sort of in China, in Mexico, and you find that actually with a local star and a locally set movie, I mean, you have to know the market. You actually get a considerable budget. And you can apply the foreign sales model directly to that market. And the local market actually supports the expansion. So I think what's really exciting here is this idea that it has gone global. So it's not just a domestic market. Whether it's at the high end, where it's, you have Jackie Chan and you have China, and so they know that his worst movie makes 150 million in China. So how much do you want? Everything else is just gravy on top of that. Do we do a global Netflix deal outside of China? Fantastic, great. We're going for 400 million domestic in China. So it might make pennies here. So that's, at the higher end, smaller end, you have Diego Boneta in Mexico, right? He has a huge profile, was a big star on Luis Miguel on Netflix. You build a movie around him in exactly the same way you build a movie around Tom Cruise, except you do it for, significantly less. You do it for, 5-6 million, which in Mexico actually carries a long way. And you Mexican director and no shortage of talent and English language. So it's really interesting. I really that's something that I'm always looking at in terms of the opportunity to use the global sort of explosion to your advantage to put these movies together, not necessarily putting American stars. Some of the sort of most money actually we've got out of local markets has been from locally recognized local celebrities, local actors who are recognized there, and that's given us local theatrical actually. So
Big time. I just got to reinforce that by saying, whether it's Netflix or anyone else, they're so focused on local language production, and they can't get enough of it. There's not enough producers in the territories around the world just to fill the demand that they're looking for local language. So if you have inroads into that, you don't need a movie to be global to be successful. It doesn't have to play in every single territory. But a lot of our distributors, as we navigate this changing landscape, we started out as a sales company. We're now a full kind of indie production studio. We do development production because we have to. The broker game just isn't going to be sustainable enough for us. We have to actually create, develop, and own the content so we can do that global deal, because it might not be, I'm going to do 20 territories and figure it out and make a fee. It might just be I'm not a sales agent on this one. I'm just selling it to Netflix, and that's done. But the local language stuff, a lot of our distributors, how they're navigating the new world is they're starting to produce local language content for all these new platforms and television stations that are demanding it, because they're not making the type of money they used to make off of just doing distribution the traditional way. So, there's lots of opportunity out there.
It's exciting.
Can we make this our final question?
Okay, have to lower it. What advice do you have for, I'm trying to decide whether my project could be an independent movie because it's very expensive. It's been budgeted to about $80 million, and it's gone through 2 studios, Warner Brothers, another big studio. They couldn't get it made. We had 1 movie star and 1 big director, and now my producing partner, who I believe is very reputable. I don't think he's criminal. He's been working for a long time. We're thinking whether we could make it independently, considering how expensive it is. Do you have any advice for such a big budget? I
should probably jump in on this one too. You mentioned Roland Emmerich's trying. I just got back from Cannes. They launched 150. It's not going to be 150 million. It's already down to 120. It'll end up being a touch under 100.
Is it going to get made? You reckon?
Yeah, probably. Midway got made. It was the same model. They launched it. It's 120, and I was literally having dinner with the financiers at Cannes. We talked through the whole model. It's going to get made for about 80. We did Ender's Game. That's about 80. Wolf of Wall Street. It's about the most you're going to do in international sales is probably 40 million out of international, excluding China. So an $80 million budget is about where you top out, maybe 90 for an independent movie. You can still put it together, but you got to pull 30 million out of China, then you got to do another 30 million out of the rest of the world. So it can be done if it's the right action adventure, type of movie.
It's not adventure, but it's action.
Or they have Leonardo DiCaprio with midgets.
Okay, I'll go get him.
So yeah, it can definitely be done. But you're right at the threshold of what the independent market can kind of support, piecing a movie together.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to say, guys, too, that there is Imagine Entertainment, Ron Howard, Brian Grazer's company, is launching this app. I think it's coming out next week, that we're going to actually have them come into the Guild and present it to you guys. It's kind of like the Blacklist situation, but on steroids. It is really this incredibly high-functioning, intuitive, searchable database of writers and material. And they've got a particular focus on what you were saying, Arash, which is that there's such a demand for sort of global stories, not even just in native language, but just those global international stories, and finding writers and this insatiable desire for content. And so this is, I've seen a preview of this thing. It's damn exciting. It's going to be a new way for the world and producers to come find you, find your material, access what we're all doing. So it's pretty exciting. So I just want to say a massive, sorry? I can't remember what it's called, and I'm not going to say the wrong name. So, but we're going to bring it into you guys, and you'll all be able to get a look at it and get involved with this thing. I highly recommend that you do. I want to say a massive thank you to our panelists for giving up their evening. And other than, going forth and writing, because apparently that's the message from tonight, let's create some content, people. We have dessert set up over there. We're going to do the other important thing you need to do in independent film, which is networking with one another, sharing our stories and our hopes and dreams. So please stay with us and have some dessert, and thank you again for coming out. Appreciate it.